I trust you know that we are on the Apostle Peter series for number 19. Today I'm going to try something a little bit different. I will speak as Apostle Peter. Okay, not with the authority, but just to tell you the story of what happened from his point of view. Okay. Salve, sonatos populosque Romanos. I came from Judea, and this is one of the Roman provinces. It is found in the smaller area called Galilee, and my hometown is in Bethsaida. Perhaps you may be able to identify in your own Roman maps. This is how you would have looked. This is how you would identify in your Roman map. It is on the other side of the Mare Magnum, or sometimes called the Mediterranean Sea. And this is where I come from. Some of you have heard me before, some of you have not heard me before, and this may be your first time. If this is your first time, then I'd like to tell you that my story is about Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, as we call it among us Jews. And for you Romans, it is easier for you to understand him as Divi Filius, the Son of God. The same term that you find in your Roman coins, referring to Caesar. But we use this term, Divi Filius, Son of God, for none other than our Messiah, our Yeshua HaMashiach. Let me tell you the story of what happened just outside my hometown. I have a helper by the name of John Mark, and this was what he wrote, and I would like to read you what he wrote. He said, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Then he spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people. They look like trees walking around. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home saying, don't even go into the village. Now this passage, this story that I have told, which Mark has written down, has generated 3 questions. And every time I tell this story, people ask 3 questions. So I might as well tell you what these 3 questions are and give you the answers. Well, the first question is this. Why did Jesus lead him outside the village of Bethsaida to do the healing? You know that in my other stories of Jesus, he will heal people where they are. He will be healing the cities, he'll be healing the streets, he'll be healing everywhere. But in this particular incident, it didn't happen. Jesus was confronted with this man who was blind. Some people brought him to Jesus, and we were all there in our hometown, and Jesus decided not to heal him there. Instead, Jesus took him by the hand and took him outside of our village before he would heal him. So the first question is, why did Jesus do that? Why didn't he heal him where he was? And the second question is, why did Jesus use spit on his eyes? Some people think it is good, some think it is unhygienic. Whatever the case, the question is, why does he use spit? Can't he just say the word and he gets healed, or say something or do something? Why in particular did Jesus use spit on his eyes? And the third question, the most difficult one, is this. Why did Jesus take 2 steps to heal him? Why did Jesus take 2 steps to heal this man? So these are the 3 questions that people always ask me when I tell this story about the healing of this blind man. Well, first of all, the first question is, why outside the village? We are told that Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Okay, so that was what happened. Well, the second question is, why you spit? He spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, and then he prayed for him. And the third question is, I see people, they look like trees walking. And so Jesus had to do a second round of healing. So once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. So the first question, why outside the village? Why did Jesus do that? Well, this is related to the end of the story, because you will remember my telling you that at the end of the story, Jesus told the man, don't even go into the village. So there was something about Bethsaida, about my hometown, that Jesus was avoiding. He took him out of Bethsaida and he told him not to go back into Bethsaida, almost as if he didn't want the healing to occur in the town of Bethsaida. Well, why was this happening? He avoided this miraculous healing there, and he avoided the people of Bethsaida knowing about it. So by him doing it this way, people wouldn't know that this man was healed. But as his disciple, I would have thought that Jesus wants everybody to know. Yet Jesus did not want some people to know. Well, there was something about Bethsaida, and this actually happened. Jesus actually pronounced a judgment on Bethsaida. Now, I find it very difficult to write it down, and I told Mark not to record it, but my fellow disciple Matthew wrote it, and so I would recount for you what Matthew wrote. It is too difficult for me to say this of my own hometown. Then Jesus began to denounce the towns where he had done so many of his miracles, because they hadn't repented of their sins and turned to God. What sorrow awaits you, Chorazin and Bethsaida! For if the miracles I did in you had been done in wicked Tyre and Sidon, their people would have repented of their sins long ago, clothing themselves in burlap and throwing ashes on their heads to show their remorse. I tell you, Tyre and Sidon will be better off on Judgment Day than you. And on you, people of Capernaum, will you be honored in heaven? No, you will go down to the place of the dead. For if the miracles I did for you had been done in wicked Sodom, it would still be here today. I tell you, even Sodom would be better off on Judgment Day than you. So you understand, Jesus Christ said something about Bethsaida. That so many miracles had been done in my hometown, and yet the hearts of the people were so hard. And so Jesus was responding to that situation and saying that there's something about Bethsaida that you all need to know, where I am not going to perform this next miracle. Jesus deliberately kept the miracle from the people of Bethsaida. It's quite clear that he deliberately did that. And why so? The first reason I believe is that because the people of Bethsaida are under judgment for their refusal to believe. They have refused to believe, and so the miracle is withdrawn. So Jesus chooses not to do any more miracle there in Bethsaida. Another reason is that so that they will not be under greater judgment. Because the more miracles are done in Bethsaida, and the longer they reject, then the greater judgment they deserve. And so for these two reasons, I believe Jesus deliberately kept the miracle away from my hometown. Now I'd like to tell you that there was something that happened earlier. You see, the Pharisees had a question for Jesus. Well, what happened was this. You'll recall that in my previous stories, I told you about how Jesus fed 5,000 people, right? He fed 5,000 people, they were hungry, and then they tried to make him king, and he went back to Capernaum, he turned them all away. But what happened after that was something like this. Jesus went around. He went around to different places. He actually went to Tyre, where he met a Syrophoenician woman, and this woman had a daughter who was demon-possessed, and she begged Jesus, please heal my daughter. And Jesus says, I cannot give that which belongs to the children to the dogs. And well, she had a very good reply, and she said, if the children don't want something, even the dogs can have it. Meaning that if the kids are eating at the table, and the kids don't want the food, they will take the food and feed it to the dogs, right? So he says, look, even though I'm not God's chosen person, and that I may not be deserving of your grace, but since your own people reject you, will you give the leftovers to me and to my children? And because you are so humble before Jesus, Jesus healed her. And then Jesus went to Sidon. And in the region of Sidon, what happened was that there was this man who was both deaf and dumb. You know, deaf people cannot speak because they've never heard. So what we are told was that Jesus put spit and put his hands into his ears and then touched his tongue with the spit and told him, be open. And all of a sudden he could hear and he could speak. So when Jesus says that Tyre and Sidon would repent before you all, he was speaking literally. He wasn't speaking figuratively. Because so many miracles were done in the region of Galilee and our people did not repent. And yet Jesus did only 2 miracles over there. And the people came to him and were eager to respond to him. But he was trying to avoid King Herod. And so we went to the other place called Decapolis. Decapolis, or the 10 towns, is a place where there are lots of Gentiles. And there, you know what Jesus did? He fed the people again. This time, all these Gentile people came and they were listening to Jesus, and they brought food with them this time, but they were there for 3 days in the wilderness and everybody ran out of food. And Jesus said, I don't want to send these people back hungry. They are really interested in my word. I've taught them. And you know what Jesus did? There were 4,000 people and he fed 4,000 people during that time. So one time he fed 5,000, another time he fed 4,000. And this was what happened after the event. You see, then the Pharisees came and then they began to question Jesus. And they told him, you know, give us a sign from heaven. You know what Jesus did? He sighed. He sighed very deeply and he says, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to it. Then Jesus left them and he went back into the boat and crossed to the other side. The other side in this instance refers to Magdala, from which you may know one of my colleagues. Her name is Mary, and she's Magdala. She's also called Mary Magdalene because she is from Magdala. So Jesus went to the other side of the lake, to Magdala, and then while on the way there, Jesus warned us. You see, we had forgotten to bring bread, and all we had was a little roll with us. And so Jesus said, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Now, we were not quite sure why Jesus said that. We thought it was because we forgot to bring bread. We were kind of hungry, we were on the boat, and Jesus was saying that. So we were discussing among ourselves, and Jesus heard our discussion, and then he said this, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? Don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? Well, we replied, 12 baskets. And then Jesus asked us, then do you remember the time when I broke 7 loaves and fed 4,000 people? How many baskets were there left? Well, there were 7 baskets left. So Jesus Christ said to us, do you still not understand? And you know, truth be told, we didn't understand. He said, do you not understand? Do you not see? And we didn't know what he was talking about. It was so hard to understand. He says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. I mean, what in the world is that? How can we ever understand what he's talking about? But you know, we didn't really dare to ask him because he was already so disappointed in us. We thought, we're going to figure it out over time. So we didn't ask him. Well, first of all, we saw that Jesus deliberately kept the sign from the Pharisees and the Herod, meaning this. The Pharisees asked for a sign. And you know, that's the thing that really puzzled me. You see, Jesus performed so many signs. And when the Pharisees asked for a sign and said, give us a sign, Jesus says, I'm not going to give you one. But Jesus, weren't you doing all these signs? And why do you refuse to give the Pharisees a sign? And what about Herod? Herod asked for a sign as well, but Jesus also refused to give him a sign. And what is this thing that is about not giving the Pharisees a sign? Well, the yeast Jesus was talking about is the yeast that demands for more signs. You see, the truth is this. Jesus had already performed so many signs. And so there's this irony of it. On the one hand, I cannot understand why Jesus doesn't want to give another sign, but on the other hand, I cannot understand why they were asking for signs. Aren't there signs all around already? Aren't there signs enough? Why should there be another sign when there are so many signs? And so the yeast of the Pharisees that Jesus was talking about was the demand for more signs. And the healing of this blind man is about understanding miraculous signs. It's all about that, because we just couldn't understand Jesus. So Jesus allowed this situation to happen so that we could understand something better about the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. Well, what was the yeast of Herod? You see, Herod was a ruler of the region of Galilee. And he had executed John the Baptist. Now, we all love John the Baptist. He was a great preacher. You Romans are macho guys. And that was what John was. He wore rough clothing, he lived naturally, he wore camel hair, he ate locusts and wild honey. I mean, he was a man's man. You guys would absolutely love him. And he was a great preacher too, and I used to follow him. Until he pointed to Jesus and said, follow this guy. He's the one that you should follow. So I started following Jesus. But John the Baptist, he is absolutely fearless. You should have seen him in his day. His eyes were fiery. And when he speaks, he has this loud, booming voice that carries it over the desert. And he would speak things exactly as they are. Now, one day, Herod did something that was not so nice. He stole his brother's wife. His brother Philip has a wife called Herodias, and he stole his brother's wife and took her as his own wife. And of course, Herodias already had a daughter, and his stepdaughter also moved in with Herod Antipas. John denounced it. And because John denounced it, Herod Antipas was unhappy and jailed him in the castle in Machaerus. And there he jailed him. And so this was true for a while. And then one fine day, during a feast, his stepdaughter did an erotic dance in front of him. And this dirty old man became very lustful over his own stepdaughter. And he was bragging at this dinner, and he says, Salome, ask for anything you want, even up to half my kingdom. And Salome consulted the mother, and the mother said, ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And so, Herod Antipas was stuck because this was a public event, and so he sent word to the executioner who lopped off the head of John the Baptist and brought it to King Herod on a platter during the festivity. Now, after that, his conscience began to bother him. So when he heard about Jesus performing miracles, he became worried. You see, John the Baptist, no matter how good he didn't perform miracles. He did not do one single miracle. But folks were telling him that, something? John the Baptist has come back alive, and he's coming to haunt you. He's taking revenge. And so Jesus is the resurrected John the Baptist. And so Herod became afraid. And he said, I'm going to send my soldiers to get a hold of this Jesus, and I'm going to ask him to perform miracles in front of me. But Jesus never did. He just gave Herod the slip all the time. So that was what Herod wanted. He wanted to see Jesus for himself. He wanted to look at some miracles. He just wanted to be entertained. By the same token, he was also fearful in his heart. And so Jesus says, I am not here to satisfy King Herod.